That's very good to hear.
Yeah,
Rob.
Larry, it's interesting because most of our staff, a couple weeks after everybody went home from work, we're back in the office. Because it's such a collaborative environment and what we do requires teams to be Yes, we have teams. You have teams all over the country. We work remote. We understand the hybrid needs when people need to. But having that collaboration and being able to bounce ideas off each other, especially for younger folks coming out of school, they get zero interaction with adults in the industry who understand development, understand putting buildings together, understand the need for infrastructure. And without having that interaction, it gets lost on a computer screen, on an iPad. So all of our folks were back, and we actually have corporate clients who can't. Their business model doesn't allow them to everybody work from home. EA Sports does not allow you to take the code for EA Sports product home. That would be against their business model. So how do you keep all those people in an office building, keep them safe, whether it's inside the space, whether it's throughout the office areas, but being able to make sure that those people can still work. So there's an awful lot of pivoting, there's an awful lot of changing on how people sit. No, nobody wants to be crammed in this tight working together on a regular basis. I don't want to hear your conversation when I'm looking at, but those things you deal with, and we've actually seen office square footage for some leases actually increase 20 or 30% in order to absorb breakout spaces and separation areas for folks. It's a requirement. So then what do you do with the office space with the market that really hasn't seen a whole lot of influx in new commercial office space? And I think to your point, 15, 20 years ago, everybody was working from home, all these startup companies, we're all gonna go be millionaire guys working at a Starbucks. Not me, but some of you. And when that whole thing changed, everybody in the office environment's like, what are we gonna do? I think the pendulum swung the other way. Maybe not for 20 months ago, but certainly in the last 8 to 12, we've seen a huge increase in that same market.
I think those are all great points, Rob. One anecdote I'll give you, if you all remember the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, do you all remember that? For those that don't know the movie, it's Tom Hanks is shipwrecked on an island. The character he plays is just an ordinary guy, and he has actually all the food and shelter that he needed. But he started losing his mind because he had no social interaction, no people. And after a while, as he was losing his mind, the only person he could communicate with, or I put that word person in quotes, was a volleyball named Wilson. And at one point, he loses the volleyball and he starts screaming, "Wilson!" Do you remember
Spoiler alert. Spoiler. I was going to watch that tonight.
So I think that story is very instructive for the future of office space. We are social creatures. It's as important as food, sex, or shelter. It's just really human interaction is who we are.
And being that we need that human reaction or interaction, working from home doesn't really get you that. Now, in the multifamily realm, we can add amenities, and in the office space, we can add amenities, and we can design the layout so that it is safer for different variants of COVID, including zoning the mechanical systems and laying out the life safety a certain way so that we entrap the air in certain locations and don't allow that to spread throughout the room. Now, in that realm, Rob, I'm sure you have some great input into the design on what will attract people back to office space. Maybe there's more amenities that we can place there to make people feel more comfortable coming in.
Yeah, I think you've got a group of folks on either end of the end zone, if you will, on the PK spot, who are all back into work like we were, or people who don't want to come back to work. I think there's a huge chasm in between of folks who are sort of in that middle section. So I think flexibility for office space, their ability to come in as they need. They don't want a hot desk with somebody. They want the picture of the cat and their kid on the desk. Those are important things to have. It's a sense of home. It's a sense of belonging. But beyond that, making sure there's breakout spaces for them to go to. Again, everybody's in an open office and people are on the phone doing lots of Teams and Zoom calls. If that one person is not self-aware of their volume, it makes it very difficult for their peers to work. So giving opportunities, providing, again, places for them to go work and retreat. I think a lot of it has to do with your culture and who you are and how you interact with people. We're extremely collaborative, and if you don't have that teamwork, very much a military approach to trusting the person that's next to you working on the projects, that you can relay. It's not going to give anybody, again, younger folks aren't getting the experience. So we've got a whole entire generation, 2 years now, of people that have graduated from school. We actually had more interns last year and the year before than we had previously in the history of the firm. We are intentionally about developing the next generation because they're smarter than I am all day long, and their ideas are great. But how do you get them developed into the profession so they understand all the things that we talk about on a day-to-day basis? So I think having that environment, having great champions for our clients, those individuals are the ones who are the champions for our firm. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the firms that have and the businesses that have people working from home and the disconnect that they don't have that connection versus the ones that do. And I think there's plenty of amenities that get added, and then there's plenty of amenities that get taken out, because that was a great idea to have foosball in the office, but not so much when you're trying to have a Teams meeting. It became a great meeting table during COVID when everybody was spread 30 feet from each other. So what we see is some of the amenities that were really cool 6-8 years ago, not so much, and they're being repurposed, and we're coming in and making those changes because development teams are saying, that's not what our current trend is seeing. We're seeing more of this. So I think when you look at those things, Dominic, you guys are in that same boat right now as you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it spills over from what you talked about was flexibility, and I think that's what most people have started to want to adopt, is the ability to, hey, I can go into an office environment, but also I can sometimes work by myself at home, whatever it may be. And the one thing none of us want to do is get stuck in a traffic jam. Let's face it, that's the one thing that we had a global realization of 2 years ago, is like, wow, isn't it great with no traffic? And it, so what we're designing, when we're designing mixed-use developments, we're consistently taking into, bearing in mind how people want to spend their days. Sometimes you do want to be at home, sometimes you do want to be in an office environment, but one of the things that you definitely don't want to do is have to take a car everywhere you go. And the more places you can walk to, whether it's for leisure, whether it's for work, whether it's for whatever, if you can walk there, or at least you don't have to go and get stuck in a big traffic jam doing it, I think we'll all be much happier. And that's something that I think the market is really screaming for over the next few years.
Dominic, I agree with that greatly, and I'm sure you and Rob both worked heavily on the master site planning of the Marina District, because depending on how you design the site, you can really force the occupants in the area to walk, which is obviously much greater for the environment, producing less greenhouse gases, and much better for the mental health and physical health and well-being of the residents. And being that people are starting to work from home more, we need to specialize in that master site plan design to implement those things like your project has done. With interest rates rising rapidly, how do we see that affecting the future projects, the current projects, and also their cap rates financially? Larry, if you'd like to start.
Well, that's a very timely question, given the inflation report this morning. In case you haven't seen it, it was the hottest inflation we've had in like 40 years, 7.5% year over year. The 10-year Treasury hit 2% thereabouts this morning. It's been bouncing like 199, up from down around 1% not that long ago. And so this is kind of terrifying for a guy like me, because I've been able to fix some of the interest rates on some of our buildings, but some of them are still floating. And with respect to new development, where you are guessing of where the interest rates are going to be, in most cases you're doing construction loans at floating rate debt, so it's highly risky. And so you would think on the surface that all of this inflation and all of this rising interest rates are going to destroy the value of commercial real estate. And that seems to be a fairly obvious thing, but it's not so obvious that rising interest rates alone will kill the industry. And I'll just give you an anecdote as to why I believe that's the case. There was a big real estate developer interviewed on CNBC, an old-time guy, he's in his 80s, named Richard Lefrak, big-time developer in New York. CNBC's interviewing him, this is about a month ago, and they say, Richard, what do you think about inflation? Is real estate going to help? Owning real estate going to help be a hedge against inflation. He turns around and he points to the building behind him. He says, "You see this building over here? I built this building 8 years ago. Do you know how many commodities are in this building? Copper, concrete, steel, et cetera, et cetera." And the interviewer sort of laughed. The point is that what's happening right now is that replacement cost is galloping ahead. And Josh, you know that better than anybody in this panel. So what's happening is our existing real estate, which has traded typically below replacement cost in Tampa Bay, now has to eventually catch up to replacement cost. But replacement cost is marching ahead at the same time at a galloping rate. So even though rates may be rising, which is very bad for real estate, at the same time, the value of the real estate itself is rising. So we're not sure how this is all going to play out. Don't get me wrong, I'm not thrilled about inflation.
And that is a good point you touched on about the materials themselves. We're experiencing very high lead times in windows and doors and other materials such as trusses. What I've heard is 11 months out for single-family homes. Josh, do you have any input on how you're dealing with those lead times and the material cost, and also additionally the labor costs that are all rising on your project to keep those rates affordable for the developer?
For my potential developer clients on this panel, I wish I had a really good answer for that. I have a part of an answer.
Ready to go.
No, I mean everybody talks about the rising costs, and the last panel talked about it. It's every scope of work, every bit of the supply chain is impacted, from the raw materials getting to the manufacturer, labor at the manufacturing facility, international shipping. Local shipping, finding concrete drivers to drive trucks to a job site, slowing you down, which I never ever thought was going to be a problem. So it's impacted everything. From everybody talks about the cost, the schedule management, which the cost of capital, the speed to market for our developers, our cost of being on the job, that's big numbers. I mean, we all know about the materials, but managing that right now for an elementary school, for the builders in the room, usually takes you 12 to 14 months to build. You can't get bar joists or roof insulation for 12 to 14 months right now. So it is the days of bidding a job and getting started in 30 days and thinking you're going to do it those are not now. You've got to get ahead, plan, work with the architects, design around the worst of the lead time issues. And we're doing it. I mean, we're doing it. You design around it the best you can. You use wide flange steel instead of bar joists. You use lightweight concrete instead of roof insulation board. But you really have to have your game on, early procurement. And the problem is when you're finishing a job like these two jobs behind me, the things that you would normally send somebody over to Home Depot or send somebody to Miami or send somebody overseas to get something, that's not happening. It's not happening. You can't fly by the seat of your pants. So proper planning, we're stockpiling some of the commodities. Somebody said on the last panel, the interesting part, these aren't just specialty items. Block is on allocation, drywall is on allocation, all the commodities. So we're stockpiling some of those. We're negotiating deals to have better allocations as a national company. So we're doing everything we can, but that speed to market and not letting it affect our schedules, you can only do so much about the material costs. You can only do so much about that. But you can control your schedule if you plan right.